On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we preview Kansas Washburn and get to our two biggest takeaways from KU football's loss to Kansas State.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and find us on YouTube where you can like and subscribe to the show. On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we are previewing Kansas Washburn. Jayhawks back in Allen Fieldhouse in their final exhibition tune-up before the regular season. We'll get to the scouting report, headlines, matchups of the game, and our two biggest takeaways to finish things off from KU football's loss to Kansas State. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So KU takes on Washburn. It is a little bit less of a, I'm trying to think how to put this, important maybe, I don't know, it's still an exhibition game. Less of a difficult game for KU basketball to take on Washburn than going on the road to take on an Arkansas team, which honestly, the more I've thought back on it, what if Arkansas is just kind of a wagon? I mean, obviously KU was, injured, and we had a recap episode, so I don't need to go more into this, but I don't know, Arkansas, there's a chance has a top 5 backcourt in the country, and they clearly have a lot of size elsewhere and everything like that. But nonetheless, KU taking on Washburn in this one for their second and final exhibition game. The game happens inside Allen Fieldhouse at 7 o'clock. And for KU, the biggest, storyline, headline question coming into this one is what is going to be the health status of certain players. So as of time of me recording this, I don't know yet. When I'm recording this right now is before Bill Self has spoken before the game. So, adjust this preview accordingly based on what he kind of says or what ends up happening with the game. But obviously the big one, you were missing Hunter Dickinson last game, which do you really need him back for this game? The tallest player for Washburn is 6'8". No, probably not going to get a lot of super great reps. So maybe it makes sense to, sit him out for this one. But then again, maybe you want to shake the rust off before the start of the season. So that'll be kind of interesting with how that works. Then with Rylan Griffin, that is one where it's and to be clear, the injuries that were stated for Rylan Griffin and Hunter Dickinson, it sounds to me more like Rylan Griffin has a tougher injury to come back from than Hunter Dickinson. So we'll see. But obviously, I think it's more important for Rylan Griffin to come back, given the matchup and given the fact that it feels like that 5th starter spot is wide open. You know what I mean? AJ Storr hasn't totally locked it down. And if Rylan Griffin, I know it's just an exhibition against a D2 school, but I don't know. What if he goes out and balls out and hits a bunch of threes? Clearly, Kansas needs more three-point shooting. Opportunity for him to start, but maybe he doesn't end up playing. So that'll be kind of a big piece of this. And then with Shaquille Moore, you're getting to the point where it's he's supposed to be coming back, but I don't know that the expectation would be for him to be back for this one. So that would be kind of where I view it. Now, obviously, in this one, even if all 3 of those players are out, this is unlike the Arkansas game where that could change you winning or losing the game or being competitive versus being non-competitive. You should be able to win this game without all 3 of those guys still by 20-plus points. This obviously, the new Allen Fieldhouse, the first game that they'll play there, which is kind of cool. Another headline with this one, obviously late night, people were in there, but not really a game. This will be the first opportunity for a game there with the new Allen Fieldhouse and the renovations and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of cool. And then the last headline is that it's the final exhibition game and final tune-up for Kansas. Now, you could theoretically view their opener as their tune-up for their next 2 games after that, which are North Carolina and Michigan State. And that makes a lot of sense. But still, that first game does matter. It matters to the win-loss column. So this one, you're going to have even more lineup experimentation. You're going to have, even more testing out of different things and longer leashes for certain players than you would have in a regular season game. I'll be curious to see if the starting 5 is the same. Now, obviously, those injury things could have an impact on that. If Hunter Dickinson's back, the starting lineup's different, But if all those guys are out, are we going to have the same starting lineup, or do we see a different starting lineup for KU? Or if, again, Hunter's still not there, but if Rylan Griffin is, back, does he end up usurping AJ Storr in the starting lineup if he is back? So that'll be kind of interesting. But again, what lineups do they use? I kind of mentioned a few episodes ago that like I wasn't really excited about any lineups you threw out where KJ was playing next to Flory. I think Flory next to Hunter can work a little bit. I think KJ next to Hunter can work a little bit. Flory next to Zach might be able to work a little bit. You hear Bill Self talking about him as the 4. Again, ideally, I would like to see AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin at a lot of minutes at the 4 where you're playing a lot of those wing lineups. But I think those ones can work. The KJ Flory one does not work because here's the thing. The idea of Zach Clements can shoot. Hunter Dickinson can shoot. So if you play one of those guys with KJ or with Flory, okay, that's fine. But if you're playing both of them that can't shoot, Flory and KJ, it just doesn't work. And that was part of, with the Arkansas game. I also don't really know how much KU was. I think I saw Chris Tehan on Twitter after the game talking about that KU wasn't running any sets. It was just motion offense. It was just, playing basketball in the Arkansas game. So I do wonder if you start to see more sets run in this game, still some just playing, and then you start to unfurl that more in the start of the season. And obviously, if you view it this way, like if Kansas is the best coach in college basketball, which I think, I think very highly of Dan Hurley, but I still think to me, Bill Self is the best coach in college basketball. If you're not running plays, I guess an element of coaching, right? Like that's going to be a disadvantage for KU. So the games that Bill Self is going to be actually calling plays, that's going to be a big boost. I guess point being, like if he was calling plays in the Arkansas game and the offense was fully in, you probably do a little bit better. But I'll be curious to see how much of that we see against Washburn. As far as the opponent's scouting report, I don't have as deep of a scout to go in on this as maybe the Arkansas game, but this is a good Washburn team from D2. They were picked to win the MIAA, and obviously that is one of the most competitive conferences across the country when you're looking at Division II basketball. And we've seen a lot of Division II schools come up and, upset. I shouldn't say a lot, but we've seen some come up and upset, Division I schools or play really close, play really tough. So if you're picked to be the best in a really tough conference, especially if you have injuries, like could this be a 15-point game? Yeah, like that is entirely possible. Like there's a chance that Washburn is better than some of the bottom half teams in Division I basketball. Like that is a very real possibility. They returned 4 players who started at least half of last season and 8 players who saw game action a year ago. So they're a very experienced team. Their leaders are Andrew Orr, who he is a 13-point per game scorer, all league second team player for them, 6'8". The problem for him, though, is that if it's Hunter Dickinson, you're giving up a ton of size, or, even if it's Flory, the length. Sam Ungashik, he is a 12-point per game scorer and a all MIAA honorable mention pick, good guard for them. But in total, they return 85% of their scoring, 76% of rebounding, 90% of their three-pointers made from a team who shot in the upper 30% from 3 and went 19-11 last season, made it to the MIAA semifinals. So it's a good Division II team. Like I said, if you were stacking up all the Division II schools with the Division I schools, like there would be a lot of Division II schools that would actually rank higher than some of the low end ones in Division I that are ranked in the 300s and stuff. And Washburn is certainly part of that. That it's, not just, you can't just view it as, like this is the worst team you're going to play on the schedule. I don't know. Maybe there's a chance that, one of KU's opponents, I'm trying to think like who the worst opponent that KU is supposed to play on the schedule is. Let's see. According to Ken Palm, the lowest ranked opponent. Okay, so KU didn't do it this year like they did last year. Howard is ranked 214th. That might be a stretch to say that they'd be better than Howard. But like last year, I'm thinking of Manhattan was ranked 337th. Eastern Illinois was 320th. Like from that standpoint, you could argue this one would be a little bit tougher the game. So as far as the importance of the game, it's just fine-tuning playing together. It's just finding the right lineups, finding the right rotations, finding who needs to play with who and who needs to play how many minutes, and getting a better idea of how that's going to go, especially because you ripped the Band-Aid off rather early this year with some very tough opponents that you really don't have much time to figure that stuff out if you want to avoid falling to 1-2 or 2-1 through the first 3 games of the season. All right, let's continue on with our matchups of the game. Then we'll get to our 2 biggest takeaways from KU football, K-State. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode is brought to you by Roy, and it's time to recognize our Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pooled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player you choose. Unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. The best part is risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. This week, I thought about a lot of different players. I thought about Jalen Daniels. I thought about Devin Neal again. I thought about Logan Brown. I thought about Mello Dotson, had himself a pretty good game and had to play through the injury just like Devin did. A lot of guys that I thought about, Caleb Taylor, Trevor Wilson had a nice game. I ended up going with Savion Morrison. Think about this. You've got the story of a guy who doesn't really play a ton, gets a few carries here and there. Daniel Highshaw's out. Devin Neal goes down with the injury on the first drive. What does he do? He runs in a long touchdown on the 3rd and long and shows that he's got some talent too. So I just pitched in $100, and you can too. Even $10 makes a difference. Let's show Savion Morrison the love and keep him connected to Kansas. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, and enter referral code Locked On, and you're entered. Already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Download Roy now and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return on you for more info. That's Roy. Support the players, change the game. On to our matchups of the game for Kansas Washburn, again, Tuesday night at 7 o'clock in Allen Fieldhouse. Number one, dominate the inside. Because if you can't dominate the inside in this game, when are you going to dominate the inside is kind of where we're at, right? Because, and to be clear, I think Kansas will do those things. But like Washburn's 2 tallest players are 6'8". You are going to have the size advantage. I know Flory's only like 6'8", 6'9", but his wingspan is that of a dude who's like 7 feet tall. If Hunter Dickinson plays, he's huge. Zach Clements would be the tallest player on the court, right? KJ Adams would basically be the height or near the height of their centers. So when I say dominate inside, I mean you should be able to get some easy buckets inside. Your big men should be able to finish inside. You should be able to dominate the rebounding battle inside, and you shouldn't be giving up a lot of points on the inside at the other end. Those are things that are prerequisite that if you do them, I'm not going to come away from this game going, wow, Kansas is the best inside team ever. But if the opposite happens where you don't do that, where you don't dominate inside, where they play even to you inside, or you have a bad game inside, it's going to be a little bit worrisome that like, oh, that's a problem. You couldn't do it against Washburn. How do you think you're going to do it against, name X opponents? So that's number one. Our number 2 matchup, KU defending the 3-point line. Washburn team shot around 37% a season ago from 3-point range. I mentioned earlier they returned 90% of their 3-point shooting. They've got a good mix of 3-point shooters. It's not just coming from 1 or 2 guys. They've got a lot of shooters who can be out on the floor. And that typically ends up being the case when you're playing some of these smaller schools that, yeah, they don't have the kids who are 7 feet tall, but they just have a lot of shooting. They have a lot of skill out on the court. And that actually makes it for, I think good reps, good practice for KU in an exhibition like this, which is kind of the whole point, that we have questions about what the KU defense is going to be. We have questions about how KU is going to defend teams who can space you out and shoot threes from a lot of different positions. We have questions about KU defending ball screens. And I think from that standpoint, you get some good repetitions in this game against Washburn, a team who is going to be able to do those things. So you get some good reps for KU. Can you figure out a way to slow down the outside shooting, get hands out there, make more shots contested from the outside to where they're not just eating you up from 3-point range? As far as our player matchup from this game, let's go with Sam Ungashik against DeJuan Harris. Now, maybe Sam Ungashik ends up being guarded by Zeke Mayo. That would still be an interesting matchup to me either way. But we just saw DeJuan Harris have an excellent scoring game in the mid-20s, which you don't normally see. But I think in this game, where you're playing an opponent that should be overmatched, you got a lot of mouths to feed. We've seen this before. I think DeJuan will go probably in facilitator mode, which also means that maybe you have more energy for the defensive end of the floor, and we see a good DeJuan game. I want to see him have 2 or 3 steals in a game like this and make a big impact on the defensive end against, Sam Ungashik, who is an all-conference player for Washburn. Don't let him go off. And maybe again, like I said, he draws a different assignment and that ends up being Zeke Mayo. But then that would be interesting too, because you want to see Zeke Mayo. Can he provide something on the defensive end in addition to what you expect from him on the scoring side, the shooting side for KU? We're going to finish up on this episode. What are our 2 biggest takeaways and top and bottom performers from PFF from the KU K-State game? This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can get in on action on KU to win the national title in college basketball. You can bet on KU Iowa State in a week when the line comes out, and get ready Tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. Finishing things up on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, our two biggest takeaways from the KU loss to K-State, as well as our top and bottom performers on Pro Football Focus. And don't forget to subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast. We'll have a KU Washburn recap coming up later this week. We'll also get into some KU basketball season predictions and our final KU basketball rotation prediction later this week too, with KU football on the bye week. So takeaway number one from KU falling to K-State, the continuous close losses, both overall and to just Kansas State in the series, when you think about these last couple, but also some other ones that have occurred, they're maddening. They are never ending, and they have well surpassed bad luck is kind of where I'm at. And you can look at the 7 straight one-score losses for KU, 5 of them happening this year. You can look at the last 2 years with K-State. You can look at some of the other ones with K-State that have been close in maybe the mid-20, like the Peyton Bender one where he fumbles. I don't know, the game where Carter Stanley played pretty well, but they had like 2 kick returns, all that sort of stuff. It's to a point where you can't just point to it and say, oh, well, you know, the reversion will come the other way. Because look back at like Scott Frost, Nebraska, and some of the Nebraska teams that, heck, even last year with Nebraska, even with Matt Rule, but like Nebraska's had a lot of teams recently that have just continuously lost these one-score games. At some point, it's not just about bad luck. If it keeps happening over and over again, it's about something systematically wrong. It is about something that you are doing wrong. And when I look to it, like, these aren't always the same players. And I think Kansas has good players. Now, maybe there is a certain element where you get late in these games, and in the back of your mind, if you're a player, you've seen this happen so many times that it's impossible to go, oh, no, we're in this situation again. Like, what's going to happen wrong? And then as soon as one thing happens wrong against you, things start to snowball. And maybe even if it's subconsciously in the back of your mind, you're going, oh, what's going to happen, right? Maybe that is part of it. I think the biggest part of it is you need to figure out how to be better at winning on the margins. And I think if you're Kansas in general, Kansas football, for them to be successful, you're going to have to win on the margins. Like, I look at what Kansas State has done, where they've been this great, consistent program for, X amount of years. They've had some years where they've been, they've had some double-digit win teams. And yeah, they are winning games big. But for the most part, like Kansas State, when they're winning Big 12 games, they're winning, closer games for a good amount of them, or they're having to, you have to perfect doing that. You have to perfect playing mistake-free football, right? That's on the coaches to figure that out. Avoid penalties, avoid dumb turnovers, avoid doing dumb things, be well coached. The game management stuff. I mean, knowing when to use timeouts, knowing when to not use timeouts. The parts about being aggressive. When do you go for 2? When you go for it on 4th down? Should you do these things more often when you're at Kansas? Because if you're not, Alabama or Georgia, who's just going to have way more talent than the other team, you have to find ways to make it up in the margins. And I feel like those are areas that KU hasn't always been the best at. Even though it's been night and day from what the Lance Leipold staff has done, from what previous staffs are doing, there still is a lot of room to grow in those areas. And I think this is a good reminder for that. Takeaway number 2 is I still think at the end of the day, this team has enough talent and ability that I legitimately think they can pick off one of their next 2 opponents who are both ranked opponents. You're playing a really good Iowa State team who's undefeated. You're playing a really good BYU team who's undefeated. And in both games, you could kind of be working at a fan disadvantage. Like the BYU game, clearly you're going to be on the road. That'll be a hostile environment, very tough place to play. You're dealing with the altitude as well. With the Iowa State game, you are playing at home, but they travel so well. And given that you're 2-6 and they're undefeated, probably an increased push for them to travel well and have a lot of fans in attendance. So it's not going to be the easiest, environments for KU in either game. But I look at the talent of this team. You almost go on the road against Kansas State and win that game. And Kansas State, I think, is as good as Iowa State or BYU, right? I guess you could say BYU crushed Kansas State, but that was kind of a weird game that had some weird turnovers for K-State. But nonetheless, like, I'm not saying I'm going to pick KU in either of the next 2 games. I think we've seen enough this season that it'd be probably smarter to not pick them in those 2 games. But what I'm saying is that if you told me right now they're going to go 1-1 in the next 2, I don't think I would be like utterly shocked. I would be like, okay, I could see that, right? And so that's almost what makes it more frustrating where they are at this point in time, that I can see that happening. But I guess it still gives you something to look forward to, that maybe they can show some good signs that you'll have a celebratory Saturday in your future at the very least. At least that's the hope. All right, top and bottom performers according to PFF. Let's start with the offense, top 5. Logan Brown, 85 grade on PFF. 80 in pass block, 90 in run block. He was really good. Trevor Wilson had an 80 grade. He had a bigger role in this one, 23 snaps than a lot of previous games, and he stepped up. He had some good contested catches as well. Savion Morrison, only 8 snaps, but a 73 grade. That was cool to see him getting in there and make that big play for a touchdown. Luke Grimm had a 71 PFF grade, so continues to impress. And then Kobe Baines was 5th with a 70 PFF grade, 71 in run block, 66 in pass block. That was nice to see. KU's had a bit of a revolving door at one of those guard spots. Some games it's been more Baines, some games it's been more Bumgarner, and that was nice to see him do well. Bryce Cabelu, for what it's worth, and Jalen Daniels were the 2 next highest rated for KU in this game. Your lowest 5 rated on offense, Tavita Noah had just a 44 grade and 13 snaps. So that wasn't great. Quentin Skinner had just a 50 grade and 31 snaps. Obviously, if he catches, Quentin Skinner, to his credit, actually had an 82 run block grade in this game. So he fought his butt off on the outside. And you're going to have drops. You're going to have mistakes as a receiver. Like, it's inevitable. No receiver is going to catch literally every pass. You just hope that it's not the one that Quentin Skinner dropped. And also, I guess you had the TCU one. So, that's been, I guess, now a theme this year. I do wonder what his grade would have been if he would have caught that pass for a touchdown. Like, how much of a boost would that have been? Jared Casey had a 50 grade. Again, I feel like PFF doesn't do a good job of grading Jared Casey with some of the key blocks he has. Torrey Lachlan in 20 snaps, a 54 grade, and then Leighton Cure in 4 snaps had a 56 grade for KU. As far as some interesting snap counts, well, we saw Cole Ballard for a snap, which I did, by the way, he already took a red shirt last year, so use him as many games as you want if you really have a package for him. Although I found it really funny in the game. They were like, I think it was Sam Acho, Emmanuel Acho, whichever Acho brother was announcing the game. He was like, he's a supreme athlete or some sort of term. And I'm like, is he though? He was a walk-on. Don't get me wrong. I think Cole Ballard is a gritty runner. He has more athleticism than you think. But, is he a better athlete than Jalen Daniels? I thought that was kind of interesting that they used him there in that situation. I was a little surprised Savion Morrison only played 8 snaps, to be completely honest, because of how well he showed out to be early in the game. Devin Neal had the injury, and I don't know, maybe it would have been good to give him a little bit more of a breather to keep him going at the end of the game. Who knows? And then it definitely felt like with Quentin Skinner, only 31 snaps. Trevor Wilson, 23 snaps, played a good game. Feels like he ate into his snaps a little bit by the 2 performances. Now, on the defensive end of the ball, Caleb Taylor was excellent. 90 defensive grade for Caleb Taylor overall. He was a 91 in run defense specifically. Javier Darrett, only 8 snaps, but a 74 grade, so good production again from the defensive tackle spot. Jason Gilliam, he had been playing through some injury stuff, and in this game he played more snaps than we've seen in a lot of games. 31 snaps, and he graded really well. 72 overall grade, 76 in run defense, 80 in tackling, 67 in coverage. Hopefully he's moving past some of the injury stuff, that he can finally hit the peak of who he could potentially be for KU. That'd be a nice boon to the kind of hawk role. Kobe Bryant was 4th for KU in PFF grade with a 70 grade, 70 in coverage. He was targeted 5 times, gave up 3 catches. But I don't know that there were any that were just huge plays. DJ Withers was 5th with a 67 grade. So 3 or top 5 were defensive tackles. Pretty good stuff there for KU. As far as the bottom 5, Tommy Dunn, 27 snaps, just a 40 grade. So not his best game, but he's had some flash games. Caleb Purdy in 8 snaps had just a 43 grade. Not the greatest there. BJ Dilworth, just 3 snaps, small sample size, 47 grade. So I don't know there. Taiwan Berryhill had a 48 grade. In the game, he had a 38 in coverage and a 50 in tackling. I mentioned earlier for Bad Goats as part of the recap that the linebackers, not a good game for KU. DJ Warner was tied with Berryhill at a 47.8 grade. And then you had Cornell Wheeler next up for as far as those kind of bottom numbers speak. As far as the snap counts that were interesting, yeah, you did get to see, BJ Dilworth and Caleb Purdy and Jalen Todd for 9 snaps. So some of the young DBs getting in there. Obviously, part of that is injuries. Continuing to see DJ Warner, the snaps. We've seen him a lot at 15 snaps. So the fact he got above 20 probably a good sign. Like I mentioned with Gilliam, interesting that he got up there. A lot of snaps for Caleb Taylor with how well he was playing for KU, and then back to kind of a full load for Cornell Wheeler at 62 snaps. Taylor Davis played a lot of snaps, 64 snaps, had some good things. He had an 86 tackling grade. He's a good hitting safety, but the coverage grade a little left to be desired at a 58 grade. So those are the interesting PFF notes from the game. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back later this week for a KU Washburn preview and some more KU basketball content. So make sure to subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast. See you next time with LOJ.